In order to fully understand American culture in the 1970s and 80s, one must go back a decade or two to learn about the American counterculture that was happening in the United States, especially amongst young people in colleges and universities. Because of situations like the Vietnam War, the Cold War, Civil Rights Movement, young people began to revolt against the acceptable social norms because they became suspicious of the government, their parents, and other authority figures. This counterculture was known for sex, drug use, even long hair, any form of rebellion against the status quo. The 2001 movie Blow, starring Johnny Depp, illustrates how counterculture became more mainstream. At the beginning of the movie, George Young, the main character, moves to California at the height of the counterculture movement. He felt that California was very liberated and everyone around was getting stoned. After some success selling drugs on Manhattan Beach, Young turns to colleges on the East Coast, and at this time it seemed fairly easy to smuggle drugs on an airplane from coast to coast. Luckily, his girlfriend Barbara was a stewardess, and the airlines never checked her bag, so she was able to smuggle pounds and pounds of marijuana from California to Massachusetts. After a short stint in prison, which Young likens to crime school, he is introduced to Pablo Escobar, Colombian drug lord. He then begins smuggling cocaine for Escobar, and at this time there is still very little security in airports and on the American border. In fact, at this time, he and his friends hire their own pilots who own their own planes to smuggle the drugs, rather than using commercial flights. During the 1970s and 1980s, it seemed like one big party in the United States. Drugs, sex, and vice in general went from being sort of an underground secret that no one talked about to being more commonplace in American culture, and one only needs to look at the television programs that were popular during this time to understand how the United States changed. For example, in the 1960s, we had shows like The Andy Griffith Show or The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, where simple problems were solved within a half an hour and every character simply wanted the best for the other character. However, the 1970s and 80s brought shows like Dallas, which were filled with backstabbing and lying, cheating, anything to look out for number one. At the same time, the United States government was cracking down on illegal activities even more than they had in the past. New organizations such as the Drug Enforcement Agency and Child Protective Services were established in the 1970s. For example, during the 19th century, any child could go to the corner store and buy morphine or whiskey for their parents. However, in the movie, which takes place in the 70s and 80s, George Young's daughter is taken by protective services after a party at their home. Continues into the 21st century. While drugs are still smuggled into the U.S., stiffer penalties await those who are arrested. George Young was just released after nearly 20 years in prison.